from day one to the end, we'll get somewhere. But until we do, we won't get very far. To arouse the attention of other Christians, resolutions were passed to send one address to the Baptists and another to all evangelical denominations of the United States of America. Notice where this was taking place. It was in the USA. It was local. It was right here in this time period that the Baptists were doing this, Seventh-day Baptists. Urging them to investigate the importance of the Sabbath doctrine. Now that document was Seventh-day Baptist Anniversaries, page 8. Seventh-day Baptist Minutes of the General Conference of 1844, page 10. It's on record that they sent this out to all the denominations of the United States of America. The Millerites were also approached, but they generally felt that either this doctrine was irregular or Jewish. Notice this. And indeed it is Jewish. And we should be proud of it.
Amen.
Because Jesus was one of the best Jews I know.
Amen.
That's right.
Amen.
And there's nothing wrong with being Jewish.
Amen.
As early as 1841, because Jesus says, I'll quote it again, if you're Abraham's seed, then you're Christ. If you're Christ's seed, then you're, no, how's it go? If you're Christ, then you're Abraham's seed and heir according to the promise.
Amen.
Right? As early as 1841, one could find a reference to the Sabbath in Millerite literature. So right here, between 40 and 42, you could find references to the Sabbath in Millerite literature. This was made by James A. Begg. Now that appeared. James A. Begg was brought up in the Reformed Presbyterian Church of Scotland. Influenced by the current revival of British millenarianism, he became an expositor of prophecy. In 1832, he began to observe the Sabbath. This man was a Millerite.
1832.
A Scottish Sabbatarian millenarian who wrote that besides his preoccupation with the Advent movement, he had to work on the continual obligation of the seventh day as the Christian Sabbath. So he was combining, he was ahead of the rest. 1 year later, a letter pertaining to the Sabbath question was disposed within an editorial remark that Millerites wished to have no controversy with the Seventh-day Baptists. In 1844, the Seventh-day Baptists were more successful. The Midnight Cry observed that many persons have their minds deeply exercised respecting a supposed obligation to observe the seventh day. After a lengthy discussion, the editors stated that we feel borne irresistibly to the conclusion that there is no particular portion of the time which Christians are required by law to set apart as holy time. If the scriptures and the considerations presented do not convince our readers of this, then we think there is another conclusion to which they must come, viz., the particular portion of time which God requires us to observe as holy is the seventh day of the week, that is Saturday. Okay? That was recorded in the Midnight Cry, September the 5th of 1844, page 69. The Millerites had two major periodicals. They had the Signs of the Times that was printed in Boston, beginning in March of 1840. And shortly thereafter, I believe in 42, or right in that neck of the woods, they began a publication called the Midnight Cry, which was a sister periodical of the Signs of the Times, and it was printed out of New York City. So this is where this appeared. In the next issue of the Midnight Cry, the discussion was concluded with the remark that we love the Seventh-day Brethren and their sisters, but we think they are trying to mend the old Jewish broken yoke and put it on their necks instead of standing fast in liberty wherewith Christ makes free. Then he goes on, Damsteed. Now, what Damsteed here is formulating for you is a progressive movement forward in history from 1843 about the Seventh-day Sabbath Reform movement, how it was actually brought into history. It was through Rachel Oakes, a Seventh-day Baptist, that the Sabbath was introduced to a group of Millerite Adventists in Washington, New Hampshire in the winter of 1843 and 44. As a result, Frederick Wheeler, a Methodist minister, or Adventist circuit writer rather, and various members of his group became the first Sabbatarian Adventists in North America in the spring of 1844. I know a lady who's directly related to that, to Frederick Wheeler. She's not in California anymore, but I know a lady who's directly related to that family. Later in that year, the Sabbath was accepted by another clergyman, Thomas M. Preble, a Free Will Baptist Adventist, who soon began publishing his new convictions. Much of his expositions included Seventh-day Baptist arguments for Sabbath observance, such as the continuing validity of the Decalogue for Christians and the Sabbath as an everlasting sign between God and His people. The responsibility of changing the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday was attributed to the Roman Catholic Church. From historical data, Preble inferred, thus we see in Daniel 7:25 fulfilled the little horn changing times and laws. Therefore it appears to me that all who keep the first day of the week for the Sabbath are Pope's Sunday keepers and God's Sabbath breakers. That was from T.M. Preble, a tract showing that the seventh-day Sabbath should be observed as the Sabbath, 1845. That's, by the way, the tract that Joseph Bates learned the Sabbath truth from. And that's the same year that the Seventh-day Baptists declared that they would call for divine intervention and restoration of the Sabbath. I think God answered their prayer, don't you?
Amen.
Most assuredly. Little known to them, he had been planning it for some time, since 457 BC. Is that right? Right. So now, what's remarkable now, he says, Preble's plea for Sabbath observance aroused the interest of Bates, Edson, and others. Bates influenced James and Ellen White to accept the Sabbath. That would be 1846. That's on our timeline. That's why it's here, right there. 1846. However, the editor of the Day Star designated the Sabbath as a type or shadow with no claims on Christians. Nevertheless, the periodical published various accounts of Adventists who had begun observing the Sabbath. A nucleus of Sabbatarian Adventists was formed, who developed a doctrine of the Sabbath which was intimately related to their Advent experience. Now notice, 3 weeks ago we talked, and I mentioned it earlier today, that you're not going to understand the fundamental doctrines of Seventh-day Adventism until you understand the experience those went through, who went through the Millerite experience and then the formation of Sabbatarian Adventism, 1844, October 22nd forward. He says you must enter into that experience yourself by an understanding of the history of the past. And here he's telling us that these early Adventist believers, let me read it again, a nucleus of Sabbatarian Adventists was formed who developed a doctrine. They developed a doctrine. Is that one of our fundamental principles? The doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Is that one of the doctrines?
Yes.
Notice how they did this. Who developed a doctrine of the Sabbath which was intimately related to their Advent experience.
Okay.
Without the experience, there would be no Sabbath doctrine. And what we just briefly went through was that early experience of how the Sabbath became a part of those Millerites who went through the great disappointment of October 22nd, 1844. This is a brief account, but there's more in our libraries, in our heritage rooms, that you can go and glean for yourselves. And if you did, there would be a wealth of opportunity for yourself to find out something more of that experience that Bates and Edson and James and Ellen White experienced. And in so doing, you'll be preparing yourself for what we mentioned earlier today, that when we look through a glass darkly, we don't see clearly. But when we look through the past, things begin to clear up. And we're going to see much more clearly how important these histories are
Amen.
in relation to ourselves, who are about to face the most stupendous crisis that the world will ever face. Ellen White says that the third angel's message is the most awful and terrible warning that the world will ever receive. There'll be no more warnings after it. But there'll be the 7 last plagues. This is critical to understand what it means to enter into the experience of the Sabbath and the great Advent movement. So he goes on to say, during the formative years of the Sabbatarian Adventists, this is the formative years, that's right here, from 46 through 48, 49, 50, 56.